your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 103 of the Future Template Parent Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Carolyn Solo, PhD, LCSW, EMDR consultant, and mom of 3 daughters. I have to tell you all that I am not feeling well today. I have some sort of a bug, but I need to get this episode recorded, so it's probably not going to be my most energetic yet, but hopefully there will still be some stuff in here that is useful for you. But yeah, just letting you know in advance if my energy isn't quite at the same level that it normally is. Let's see, I think I have a fever, and I definitely TMI threw up last night, which doesn't happen very often and is always very unpleasant. So I'm pretty drained, but here I am. Anyway, so today's topic is clinical supervisors. I think supervision, consultation, whatever you want to call it, is one of the most important ways to grow clinically and to do that in an ethical way, and to also grow as a business owner. So you can have clinical consultation and then also more of the business consultation, although I think as a therapist, business owner, those two overlap a lot. And I think if you have a good one, if you have the right one, you can grow in both of those ways in your work with that person. So I'm going to do a bit of a review of different clinical supervisors I've had over the years and consultants, what helped. And yeah, all of them have contributed to my career trajectory to becoming an EMDR intensive therapist, becoming a consultant, PhD researcher, private practice therapist, business coach, all these different hats I wear. These people have contributed in different ways. My very first job out of graduate school was in community mental health in a urban area in Philadelphia. And for those of you who've been in that type of setting, and I know many of you have, clinical supervision in those places, to put it kindly, is hit or miss. And of course, that's a systemic issue, not an individual supervisor issue, but obviously it trickles down. I actually got very lucky with my very first supervisor in community mental health. She actually was very, very clinically skilled. She was very committed to the agency. She was a really good therapist. She really cared about the work that she did. She was someone who was trying to balance a lot of conflicting pressures, but she really made it clear that the well-being of her clinicians mattered, and she also cared a lot about developing us, to the extent that she could do that in her limited role. I would say one of the things that made her a good supervisor in this particular setting was also one of the things that was a challenge, and that was that she worked nonstop. She was, I don't want to say a workaholic, because I think it was kind of put on her by the job description. It was just an impossible job, but she was actually trying to do it all. She worked crazy hours. She was always available. She was always there. She was always buried in paperwork. And I think we all saw that, and on the one hand appreciated her commitment to the job, but also I think I often felt like, oh, am I supposed to be doing that? Especially because she was really good. It felt like, well, that's the way to, get to that level in this agency, is to work like she does. And so I think she was setting an unsustainable, unrealistic standard. And I know it was unsustainable and unrealistic because after maybe a year and a half of her being there, when I was there, she left. And she had been at this agency for 10 years. And I think she finally had just had it. She was done. She was so burned out. And I get it now. Her job was, I would never want that job. It's amazing she made it as long as she did, but she was my first supervisor, and I loved her, and I'd grown a lot with her. So I was really sad about her leaving, but I think it also helped me understand the variety of issues at play at this agency, that she eventually was like, this is too much. I can't do it. And after she left, I would say that I was subject to a more traditional community mental health supervisor experience. She was so excellent, and that was not my experience after her. I had 5 supervisors in 2 years. They were usually inaccessible. They were really focused on the numbers, which again was coming from the top down. They weren't responsible for the fact that their focus was on how many clients are you seeing, and if you're not seeing enough and you're not retaining them, like that's the fault of the clinician, all that stuff. But you know, that was what their focus was on, and naturally that often led to some unethical practices, things that were certainly against the rules if you read the rule book, but they were engaging in them to meet quota and things like that, and to dodge audits and all sorts of stuff. You know, having clients sign treatment plans before they'd even seen them, just because we needed to get the treatment plan signed so we could bill for the session. You know, overloading clinicians with back-to-back clients, having clients come in for like 5 minutes at a time and then still bill for a session because they were in the office, you know, all sorts of stuff. It was hard to respect them. It was hard to feel like it was worth working with them. It was hard to believe that they were at all invested in your growth. So these kinds of supervisors were not invested in your growth. They were managers, right? Not clinical supervisors, even though that was their title. Really, their purpose was to manage the employees and in theory provide them with clinical supervision, but those two goals are really at odds with each other, because a lot of the times the stuff we were being asked to do from a managerial standpoint were not necessarily things that were the best clinically for our clients. So that was a real tension that I was grappling with. And honestly, luckily for me, I mean, honestly, it was lucky. I really do feel this way. Clinical supervisors at my work could not provide hours for licensure. It was unlucky, I thought at first, because it meant that I was going to have to go find and pay a supervisor. But it was lucky in that I had to go somewhere else to get an outside perspective for my clinical supervision for my LCSW. I ended up finding an amazing supervisor. I did have to look elsewhere. The way I found her was that she'd supervised one of my friends from grad school at her clinical internship, our second year of grad school. And my friend thought that we would be a good match. She knew that this person was now looking for supervisees. So I contacted her, and it was great. So it was my first time like kind of branching out into private supervision outside of my workplace. You know, I'd had supervisors at my internships who were, of course, at the work site, and then this most recent one. So I think thinking about my supervision relationship with this person is also just a quick reminder to evolve the ways that we build professional networks, right? I'm still in touch with this person, very much so. We've done consultation on things at different times. We've helped each other in different ways. We've provided each other with opportunities. But I'm still in touch with her, and she supervised me from 2015 to 2017. You know, I met her through a grad school friend. We've collaborated in different ways over the years. We've referred clients to each other. We've been like, you know, written recommendations for each other, you know, all sorts of things. And we respect each other hugely as colleagues, thanks to this supervision relationship, which was long until we really got to know each other clinically. And we're friends. We've both moved, visited each other at our new homes. We keep up with how each other's kids are growing, all that stuff. You know, it's just that constant reminder that relationships are, you know, networking is about relationships, and relationships that you nurture and grow reap so many rewards. And you don't need lots of relationships like that, because who has time to nurture that many relationships? But some that you nurture with intention and consistency. So why was this supervision relationship so wonderful? Well, I got my LCSW hours through her, and she aligned with my values. An anti-racist, anti-oppressive approach to practice. She was very validating of the experiences I was having in community mental health. She had worked in those settings, and she understood the ethical challenges. She understood how to do good work in settings that were, you know, really restrictive, or not restrictive, but resource depleted. She got why I loved the clients I worked with, and really understood the kind of work I was trying to do. She taught me a lot about how to work well with people who come from backgrounds that are very different than my own. and was really, really good about lovingly kind of pointing out blind spots for me. Um, and she supported me as I started to ponder other paths, leaving that agency. She was also a mom, is also a mom, which was so important to me. You know, it is still so important to me, but like I became a mom during our time working together. I got pregnant with my first child like a couple of months into working with her. And then I resumed supervision with her once I went back to work after my daughter was born. I have memories, many memories, of pumping breast milk in her office in our 5 p.m. post-work supervision sessions. You know, this was back in the day of everything had to be in person, so I brought my whole stuff with me. Virtual therapy, not to mention virtual supervision, was not something we could really fathom at that time. So I trucked all my stuff with me after work and went to her office across town and did supervision and then trucked home where my baby was waiting. So she really understood where I was at, both professionally and personally. She was aligned with my values and could actually advise me from a position that was not allied with my agency, right? And that's really the problem with having a supervisor who works at the place that you work, who's also your, like, you know, administrative supervisor as well as your clinical supervisor. She was a driving force in helping me understand how unhealthy these settings could be for both clients and clinicians, and that it was okay to question it. It was okay to be outraged. She also helped me see that, you know, relational, attachment focused psychodynamic therapy was what mattered to me. And she also helped me see that there are other ways to be a therapist other than just being in community mental health. I stopped working with her when I finished my LCSW hours and when I started my PhD program. I took a couple of years off from clinical work when I was in the PhD program. And in 2019, I decided to start a very part-time private practice virtually because I've been reading more about private practice, hearing friends talk about it, listening to podcasts about it, that journey that a lot of us go on. And I thought, hey, I could dabble. And I missed clinical work. And I was still in the program. And I didn't want to take on a full-time job. So it was like, how am I going to do a little bit of clinical work? And I also had heard about people doing virtual therapy by this point. And so I realized I could actually do that and just have a handful of clients that was going to work with my life, my schedule. You know, I missed clinical work. I was not at all sure that I wanted to pursue academia. And spoiler, guess what? I didn't pursue academia. So I'm very glad that I had this other track that I was working on. But as I was starting to build a private practice, I realized I wanted to get back into supervision. I wanted to work with a clinical supervisor who knew it was like to kind of be in that messy middle of getting a practice up and running. And this is also when I got trained in EMDR. And, you know, I often credit starting EMDR, getting trained in EMDR, like my experience in community mental health, where I felt so powerless and like nothing I could do could possibly help these people with such severe trauma histories. You know, finding EMDR made me feel like, oh, thank goodness there is something. And also made me feel, gosh, I wish I'd had this when I worked, you know, there. But anyway, so this is when I got trained in EMDR, like right as I was starting my private practice. And I really loved one of the consultants who was part of my basic training. And I ended up working with her in both group and individual settings to get my EMDR certification hours. Why did I choose her? Well, I aligned with her clinically. She was very attachment focused. She did a lot of ego states work. I learned a ton from her about parts work, about working with dissociation. And it was easy to work with her because I already had that relationship. I already knew how to find her. I didn't have to look around. It's also a good lesson. There are many, you know, the more things you get involved in, like if you end up being a consultant at a training or something, you're going to get supervisees and things like that from there. You're just going to continue building that network, right? So you're always expanding your network in different ways. Right. So I kept working with her, and clinically, I respected her because of her deep knowledge of working with complex trauma, with dissociative clients, really trained at ego states work, which was kind of new to me, but I was really excited by it. We had done some ego states work in my EMDR basic training, and I was really fascinated by it, and I was learning more about it. It's funny. It's like I look back and I'm like, wow, there was a time where I didn't know about ego states work, but there was. And she was also the first person I'd ever heard talk about intensives. and intensives with complex clients. And, I was still in the very early stages of my private practice, but I was like, I don't want to go back to being burned out like I was in community mental health. This could be another way to make really good money as a clinician and also do really good work that wasn't going to burn me out through all the reasons why one-to-one hourly clients can burn us out. So I was sold. I was going to work with her. What was really cool too is that I got to work with her in both a group and an individual capacity. You can get up to 10 of your certification hours in a group, and then the rest have to be one-to-one. So I did all of my group hours with her and all of my one-to-one. Yeah, I did them all with her. And I loved our one-to-one work. I got to really ask the questions that I had and talk about my cases as much as I wanted to and all that stuff. But I found the group work to be a really nice balance because I got to benefit from her clinical expertise and then meet an incredible group of therapists who were also working to be the best EMDR therapists they could be. And I'm still in touch with some of them today. That's why I find this group dynamic to be so powerful. And it was so powerful and so beneficial. And I loved the networking and support. So I knew I wanted a similar experience for becoming a consultant. And so that informed how I picked the person I wanted to work with as my supervisor, consultant, whatever, for my becoming an approved consultant. I also wanted access to a consultant who was experienced with intensives because I continued to feel drawn to that model. I was feeling like those 50-minute sessions were too short. I was feeling overwhelmed. And so I found this 8-month group program focused on becoming an EMDR consultant. I got 16 group hours from that program, and then I got 4 more individual hours from somebody else, which was a nice balance, but I really loved the group. I got a great group of sophisticated EMDR clinician colleagues who are really committed to building high revenue EMDR intensive practices, got them to know them and scaling beyond that. And that was an amazing thing to get from that group. I'm still in touch with them and they're running these great intensive practices across the country. They're speaking at conferences. They're writing books. That group is also where I first started to develop the idea for the podcast. And I don't think I would have had the guts to kind of take the leap and make this happen if it weren't for the support of the people in the group. I had a ton of imposter syndrome about starting a podcast about intensives because I was like, there are so many people out there who know so much more than I do. But this group was like, well, no one else is doing this, so why not? Like, what's the worst that could happen? People don't listen, And of course, the podcast has grown because I had I decided to take that first step. And the cons of that group, well, we didn't get the kind of marketing support I was expecting. It was more of a like, hey, just put intensives on your website, you'll get them. I also didn't get a lot of guidance about how to approach them clinically, intensives, how to structure them. It was very much like, you can have intensives go any way you want. People want them, people need them. And not necessarily talking too much about how to adjust your practice structure to make room for intensives. There's a lot of talk about high fees, but we didn't do a whole lot of mindset work or thinking really carefully about how to get to a fee that we felt good about. So all those experiences of supervision that I've been talking about, consultation groups that I've been in, individual supervisors I've had, have helped me craft all the coaching offers I have, both one-to-one and the group program. I knew what worked for me. I knew what I got out of them that was great, what was missing, and what I wanted to emulate as a consultant and a coach. And so now all of you get to reap the rewards of my experiences. So if you're interested in working together in any capacity, you can always schedule a free one-to-one call to see if we're a match. Link is in the show notes. I'd love to be part of your journey towards offering intensives. So thank you for joining me for episode 103 when I haven't felt that great, but I still showed up. So clinical supervision and consultation, both in a group and in a one-to-one setting, they're such an important part of our ethical clinical practice and our development as clinicians. So I'd love to know about your supervision experiences. I think it's something we don't talk about that much in the field, and it's so important that we're all surrounding ourselves with colleagues and supervisors and people who have different ways of thinking, have experiences that we don't have to guide us, to help us stay grounded in our decision making. So yeah, I think it's something that everyone should be, whether it's in a group or one-to-one, have some sort of sounding board so that you're not just practicing EMDR in a vacuum. because it's isolating, and sometimes we make mistakes because we don't have those people to kind of reflect back to us what we're doing. So I hope you all have that in some capacity. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.